During lockdown last year, I started, like many of you I suppose, watching some stuff on Netflix. I started to watch a show called The Good Place. Are there any fans? Yeah. It's very clever, and every episode delves into some exploration of existential philosophy. That sounds good, Matt, doesn't it? That might sound mind-numbingly dull to all of you out there, but it's actually a very, very funny show. Very funny. But it's also poignant. There are some very poignant moments. And one of the quotes from the series that stayed with me is from the main character, Eleanor, and there she is in that picture there. She's trying to explain to one of the non-human characters just what it's like to be a human being, and to give them some idea of why we do the things that we do. And she says this: all humans are aware of death, so we're a little bit sad all of the time. That's just the deal. But we don't get offered any other ones. And if you try to ignore your sadness, it just ends leaking out of you anyway. I've been there. Everybody's been there. So don't fight it. We're aware of death, and that makes us a little bit sad all of the time. That's just the deal. And there's no other deal on offer. Doesn't that all just sound a little bit hopeless? Or a lot hopeless, actually. Well, we're living through a time when we're bombarded with death all of the time, aren't we? For those of us who usually manage to keep thoughts of death at bay, to keep that reality in the background, there's been no escaping it this past year. But we have all kinds of strategies, don't we, for dealing with it. Sometimes we use humour, or we just might get on with life and use busyness to cover over that. Or sometimes we just pretend that it's not a thing. All kinds of strategies, but for many of us, I suspect that all of those strategies would have been ineffective in the face of everything that we've lived through this year. Well, the story of Easter Sunday begins in darkness, in hopelessness. On the first Easter Sunday, the women, if they slept at all, would have woken up and remembered everything that had happened just 2 days before. We've all been there, haven't we? When some terrible event has happened in our life or in the world, and you fall asleep and you try to put it behind you, and then you wake up in the morning and all of those feelings and that remembrance comes to the fore again. It all comes flooding back in those first waking moments. Well, for these women, Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of James, they got up in the dark, weary and numb with grief, and they made their way to the tomb together. And they were going to do what was usually the work of women in these situations, to tend and care for the body of their friend, their teacher, Jesus. And they carried with them all of the trappings of death, the spices and the perfumed oils to cover up the stench of rotting flesh, to cover over this hopeless ending, to make everything final, to put the full stop at the end of the sentence. I wonder what that walk was like. Did they walk in silence? Maybe they did. Maybe they had nothing to say, but it always surprises me that in those moments of death and tragedy, there are still practical things that need to be done and discussed. They'd had their Sabbath the day before, their day of rest, so this day was the beginning of the normal working week, and there were people to be fed and households that needed looking after and shopping to be done, all of those ordinary, everyday things pressing in on their grief. I wonder if they spoke about some of those practical things as they clambered around in the dark together, getting ready to leave. We don't know what they spoke about as they walked along, but what we do know is that when they came to the tomb, carrying their perfumes and spices, they saw that the stone in front of the tomb had been rolled away so that they could walk right in if they wanted to. Right into that place of death. And so in they went, and they looked around, but they could not find the body of Jesus. They could not find him. And this threw them into a state of utter confusion. They had no explanation as to what could have happened to the body. But while they were there wondering what on earth could have gone on, the darkness was pierced with light. And there were two men standing in front of them, and their appearance was so wonderful, so overwhelming that they fell to their feet and they began to worship them. But then these men spoke and they asked the strangest question. Such a strange question. Why are you looking for the living among the dead? Why are you looking for the living among the dead? The Bible doesn't tell us what, if anything, these women said, but I can imagine what would have been going on in their minds. Why are we looking for the living among the dead? That's the wrong question entirely. It doesn't make any sense. We're not looking for the living. We're not looking for the living. We're looking for the dead. Nobody in their right mind would walk into a tomb if they were looking for the living. You don't go looking for someone who is alive inside a tomb. We're not looking for the living. We're looking for the dead. We saw a man beaten and tortured and hung on a cross to die. We're not looking for the living. We're not looking for the living. We're looking for the dead. We saw nails go through his hands and his feet, and we saw his side pierced. We're not looking for the living. We're looking for the dead. We saw all of that horror unfold. All of that horror, and we heard his final words, and we saw him draw his final breath. We're not looking for someone who is alive. We're not looking for the living. We're looking for the dead. And that same man, we saw Joseph take him down from the cross, his broken and battered body. And we watched and we followed Joseph to the tomb, and we watched Joseph as he laid that body in the tomb and sealed it up. We saw all of this and more. We're not looking for the living. We're looking for the dead. But then those two illuminated figures, they said something else utterly amazing. They said, he's not here. This is a place for the dead. And he is not dead. He's been raised to life. Remember, he told you that all of this would happen. He told you that he'd be handed over to wicked men, that they would put him on a cross. He told you all of that. Do you remember what he told you? And that's not all he said, is it? He told you that after 3 days, he would be raised back to life. And so now we are telling you, he's not here. He's alive. And the women did remember. And then they must have wondered, why are we looking for the living among the dead? So they left the tomb. They left that place of death behind them. And they ran back to the disciples and told them everything they had seen, everything they had heard, everything that had been said to them. And they repeated it over and over and over. But the disciples would not believe a word of it. They thought that these women were making it all up, and they cried, fake news. We've heard that this year too, haven't we? Fake news. But the women wouldn't be silenced. They'd remembered the words of Jesus. Everything he said, that would happen. And they'd heard the testimony of the angels, and they had seen the empty tomb for themselves. They'd seen it with their own eyes. And they would not, they could not keep quiet, because that empty tomb, empty as it was, it had filled them with hope. You remember Eleanor's words from The Good Place. All humans are aware of death, and that makes us a little bit sad all of the time. That's just the deal. And there's no other deal on offer. But what if she's wrong? What if she's wrong? What if there is another deal? And what if that deal is entirely in our favour? Paul's words in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 echo the words of those women on that first Easter Sunday. Here's what Paul had to say. And now, dear brothers and sisters, we want you to know what will happen to the believers who have died, so that you will not grieve like people who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and was raised to life again, we also believe that when Jesus returns, God will bring back with him the believers who have died. We tell you this directly from the Lord himself. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a commanding shout and the voice of the archangel and with a trumpet call of God. First, the believers who have died will rise from their graves. Then together with them, we who are still alive and remain on the earth will be caught up in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And then we will be with the Lord forever. Forever. This is our endless hope. And Paul says this, so So encourage one another with these words. Encourage one another with these words. And that's what those women on that Easter Sunday were doing. They were encouraging their brothers on Christ. But on that first Sunday, while most of the disciples ignored them, the testimony of Joanna and the other Marys and the other women, it had little effect on most of the disciples. But for one of the disciples, it did make a difference. It was Peter. And eventually, after hearing them go on and on and on, he jumped to his feet and ran as fast as he could to the tomb. And then he stooped to look inside. And the scriptures tell us that all that he saw there were a few grave clothes. And he left that place of death, shaking his head. But the hope of the women, the testimony of the women, had encouraged one of the disciples to take a look. That's what hope can do. It can spread from one open heart to another. I'm going to ask the musicians to come up. Just to start playing, we're going to sing in a little bit. Before my grandma died, she gave some very specific instructions to our family about what was to happen with her ashes. She didn't want them kept in one specific place, and she didn't want them poured out in one specific place, but because she didn't want the people that she loved going to one specific place as if to find her there. Why are you looking for the living among the dead? And instead her ashes were poured out into a rushing river. So there was no place to go. No one place to go to remember her. And I think she knew what she was doing. Because there are some people in my family, and I am one of them, who love cemeteries. Love them. I love to visit them. Doesn't that sound like fun? If we're going on a driving holiday, or if we're in a little town and there's a little churchyard graveyard, I like to pull over and have a bit of a squeeze. Wander through the graveyard, looking at the gravestones, reading them, and imagining what their life might have been like. And even if I'm honest, grieving a little bit over all the death. Even when I was at the training college, sometimes between classes, we were in Parkville there, I would go and wander through the cemetery across the road. It's really pleasant. Just to relax for a little while. And that's okay for an afternoon. But a graveyard is a place that we visit to remember, isn't it? It's a place we visit. We don't stay there. We don't dwell there. We certainly don't want to live there. We don't want to live there. Perhaps the question for us today is this: why are you seeking the living among the dead? Why are you looking for life in all the wrong places? Why are you turning to things that are never going to satisfy? Never going to satisfy you or fulfill you or give you life? Why do you chase after money and things and status when they're only going to drain the life out of you? Why are you looking for the living among the dead? If you're looking for life, seek the living God. Seek the living God. Look for Him. Follow Him. And find the source of all life. We're going to sing a very simple song. It's just a chorus, actually. He is Lord. He is Lord. He's risen from the dead, and He is Lord. Every knee will bow. Every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. That's the testimony of those women on that Easter morning, isn't it? This Jesus, who we have loved, is not just our teacher and friend, but He is our risen Lord. It's a brand new day. All humans are aware of death. And sometimes that makes us a little bit sad. But there's a brand new deal on the table. A brand new deal, and it's all about life and living. And it starts with Jesus, who rose from the dead. And that gives us endless hope, doesn't it?